Next news item down is the state of Concord. Now, we went back and forward, mostly back on whether to do another video on Concord, because what the hell do you even say at this stage other than like, hey, the thing that's died is still dead? But Concord finally released at the end of the week. Not that you'd know it from Sony's side. I feel like the marketing just sort of shriveled up once after the closed beta and then the open beta. Just being like, it's gone, lads. We can't save it. Just gotta sort of slide the body back into the morgue. It's done. But to that end, Concord's player counts dropped to below 100 across the first couple of days across the previous weekend. And I just checked Steam before we started recording, and it had a concurrent 24-hour peak of 198. So the ongoing conversation is that it's the biggest bomb in Sony history. And it does put it alongside the likes of Concrete Genie and Destruction All Stars, but even those games had thousands of people playing them, especially Destruction All Stars. Is it just done? Like, did they? Because I was like, I almost bought it. The thing is, I wouldn't have minded playing a bit more of it. I liked playing as Halsey. Like, I like the bits and pieces of the gameplay. The gameplay itself's the best thing about it. I don't really care about the presentation, but I quite like that limited edition controller as well. I kind of fancy one of them, and I think, like I said, the gameplay's cool, so I was like, I kind of fancy dipping in and having a few matches, but I was like, nah, because it's £45. Like, if it was free to play, I'd be on it. And I wonder how many people share that sentiment, where if it was just put in front of them, they'd give it a shot. And I think because of the insane negativity, if they now do a free-to-play weekend or a week or something, I do think people would check it out. But it is interesting that even the people who paid the most or paid the money up front the earliest still dropped off. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Like even the beta numbers just only went down.
Man, I think it's a shame. I really do. Call me a Sony fanboy or whatever, but like I played the beta and those kind of hero shooters like aren't for me, but I could still recognize that it was pretty good. It was fun to play. I liked the characters, you know what I mean? I thought the character designs were great. I still remember messaging you when I saw like the opening cutscene and I was like, Scott, this facial tech is so good, like the animations and the... Sorry.
We need to get you a megaphone because the amount of negativity around the character models is vastly, stratospherically outweighing the positivity. I'm not on the, oh my god, can you believe train, but I don't think they're that aesthetically appealing. The color gradings, the color combos are all over the place.
Yeah.
But I like Halsey, but it's whatever. But yeah, like there is a whole ongoing conversation on how bad the characters are. So a bit of positivity is quite nice.
Well, that's it. I get it. Like, these games kind of live and die on whether or not you want to unlock skins for the characters and stuff, right? So I understand it. They really work for me. I was looking at the roster when I was playing the beta, and I was surprised with how many cool designs were in there. Again, for my tastes, I thought the overall aesthetic, even though it has that kind of space western feel that I think is a little bit overdone, it was a good version of that. And again, it was the cutscenes that really did it for me. Like, that was what made those characters. I know we only got a small glimpse of them in the beta, but I was like, wow, there has been a lot of talent and quality put into those for my money, and I would like to see more of those. But am I going to pay that £35 price to see them? Not for me. I think, the gameplay was good, but like I said, it's not my thing anyway. And the hero shooter genre, you've seen more failures than you have successes. We've seen so many people almost 10 years ago now try to chase the Overwatch dollar, release their own versions of it that were, not stinkers. They were all right. They were pretty good, but you need to have something truly exceptional and truly original in this space, I feel, to break through. And even I'll admit that Concord doesn't seem like it's that. It played like a lot of other things, had a few cool ideas, but especially for a price point like that, which I don't think is unjustified for what they're promising, because they're promising in terms of like the unlocks. Doesn't seem like a game that wants to nickel and dime you. You're getting those cutscenes every week. But in the current market and going up against other games that are out right now, either free to play or, of a similar price point, Helldivers 2 from earlier this year, like, there's just a lot of competition. Like, I probably would have bought it if we were in a more freer kind of part of the year, but we've just talked about Star Wars Outlaws. I bought Hunt Showdown for 25 quid, and I didn't want to add another game on top of that, and Concord was the one I was least interested in, so it fell by the wayside. And I wonder for how many people it's less a hatred and more of just like an apathy of, I maybe would have played it if it was free, or the beta didn't do too much for me. We've just got so much choice, and I don't think Concord really had that cutting edge to break through.
Well, it's like I forget who said the quote, like the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. Like if it's just full on, like I just don't care, I don't muster anything towards this. Yeah, I wonder if that's the prevailing sentiment from more people. Speaking of competition as well, when the betas were on for this, I think it was in between both betas was when Valorant dropped on consoles. And I know that that's not a straight up hero shooter as much as this is. It's a bit more of like a military shooter kind of edge to it. But that scratched the itch for me, and it's free to play. Like, so it was just easy to jump in. Like, I think it's insane. Like, you've got an 8-year development, which is that's by itself is crazy. Because I get that you were massively influenced, assumedly, by Overwatch. But then to take so long to turn it over, and it wasn't a Sony project in the first place either. They were acquired. Firewalk, I always get it wrong, were acquired by Sony.
Yes.
The project was already in the works by then, that's kind of interesting in itself, because then you had Sony go like, okay, this is going to work for us. And then Concord survived the Bungie internal review, that whole live service thing that apparently happened that killed off Last of Us factions. And it was, for whatever reason, Concord had enough of a tail on it, where whichever members of Bungie did that review were like, Last of Us isn't going to work, but Concord is going to work. And I think that's really interesting, because it does fit a model. Like you said, you have the skins, you've got the long-term unlocks, you've got the story stuff, you've got the crew building system, which in theory would change as characters are available. Like, I just think it's fascinating to watch something with this much money, this much trust behind it for so long, just like barely hits, like barely even make a dent. And it was a bit like Suicide Squad. It was like everyone kind of knew what this was going in, played it a little bit, and we're just like, it's fine. In terms of the reputation, like, this is a drastically better game than Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
And it still feels like the developers cared about making it. It doesn't feel necessarily like a corporately mandated thing, even though it follows a lot of the tropes that a lot of people are getting a bit sick of in terms of the Disney tone and things like that. It still feels like a bunch of people wanted to make something and they were able to get it off the ground, but not very much.
I think it's sort of a regression on Sony's part, because I like the idea, because like I said, I think the devs seem like really talented. I like the work that they've done. But at the same time, when Sony chases trends, and I know they sometimes do that in the business realm, but when it comes to their games, like, I don't think a lot of people are coming to Sony to get a version of something that they've either already had or can get somewhere else, right? I mean, I'm a Killzone fan, I'm a Killzone defender, but I partly think that didn't take off as much because it wasn't as solid as a Halo. It was not as penetrative in the market as like a Call of Duty, and it kind of failed. Like, no one was going en masse to Killzone just because they like Sony products or kind of like want to play it on PlayStation or want a Sony version of that. Like, Guerrilla Games got much bigger success by kind of doing something a little bit different in the first party space and giving us like a big open world action game with like RPG elements, a new IP. We got Horizon, and that kind of like took off. Like, it's not a rule that I think works every time, because you can argue something like, Spider-Man, that works for different reasons because it has like that name brand value. But I do think there is an established thing that Sony is known for that we've kind of been critical of. There is that idea that every big Sony blockbuster now is third person, over the shoulder, narrative driven, and maybe they're doing too much of that, but it's a Sony thing. It feels like a Sony thing. When
At least
someone
they
else,
birthed that with
that's
Last of
it.
Us, yeah.
When other people make a game like it, they're always compared to The Last of Us, to God of War, or whatever. It's identifiably them. Something like Concord is identifiably not them. It's always going to get comparisons to other things. No one is, I don't think, and this is maybe harsh, but I think it's just how some of the wider market things, no one is going to hero shooters and going, oh, that reminds me of Concord, right? Like, they're going
totally.
to Concord saying, oh, that reminds me of Overwatch. And I think once you have that in the brain, you're kind of fighting a losing battle, because if you don't have those identifiable features that instantly mark you out as special, then it's hard to break into the market, man.
Yeah, and it's like that thing of like, I think I said this in the run-up to it. I would have been on the podcast or one of the videos that we did, where I was like, I've not seen Sony so nakedly chase a trend before. Like, they as a company have done that, where they brought in trophies after achievements. They did VR after someone else did it, Oculus. Like, they tend to do that in terms of like feature sets, where it's like, oh, we should have thought of that. Let's implement that. But unless I'm forgetting something, they've never looked at a really popular game and gone, we should do one of them. Like, it's just, if they have, they masked it a hell of a lot better. And in this case, like you said, you look at this and you immediately think of 8 other things that it's similar to. And I think it's interesting to keep it like a like the ongoing conversation on where does it even land kind of thing, is that I wonder, like, if people who are into hero shooters, do they have their hero shooter of choice, and is that just locked down at this point? Is it Overwatch? Because you saw Valorant spike on the sales chart for the first few days when it was launched a few weeks ago, and that's gone out of the top 10 again. But like, you did get people checking it out, and it's like people just didn't even check out Concord when it was available. So it's like that it didn't have the stickiness, or whatever you want to call it, to bring people in. And even those that did come in didn't stick around, because I wonder if they are already hero shooter fans. It's like, well, everything Concord is trying to do is damn near Overwatch. Like I was back on Overwatch 2 after playing Concord.
Yeah.
Mainly because the beta period ended. I needed something else to play. But it was so close that I was like, I can scratch this itch over here. Like, it's the same thing.
Dude, I mean, for me, when it comes to these hero shooters, it's the exact same thing that happened with the military shooter boom in the late 2000s, you know? So many developers kind of just went, we need a Call of Duty, we need a Battlefield, get us one. And they all failed. Even identifiable franchises with histories like Medal of Honor came back and were rejected because they were too close to the thing that people already settled on. And it's not that you can't divert attention, but I think it's really hard when someone has a multiplayer ecosystem of choice that ticks all of their boxes to steal that market. It's always a fool's game for me. Like, we've seen so many disasters. It's a miracle that Battlefield was able to get any audience of its own in a way, and even that achieved it by doing a lot of things Call of Duty couldn't. Like, that was at its worst when it was just directly chasing Call of Duty's team deathmatch, and that's kind of what Medal of Honor was, you know, DICE doing the multiplayer, something much closer to COD, and it didn't work. Battlefield worked because it's something it's different. It's like it's not just doing the exact same thing. It's similar, but it has its own identity. And Concord hasn't done enough of that for me to etch itself out as something different. It is just another one. And history shows us that when you do just get another one, if it's not doing something cutting edge, like, audiences will just stick with the thing they know and like and have invested. In the case of Overwatch, like nearly 10 years into at this point.
Well, that's the thing, and also Overwatch 2 went free to play, so it's like, if you just want to just try that out, you've got a drastically more robust, set of abilities for the characters, etc., that is right available to you. But yeah, I think the way that it's shaken out, like the marketing side of it I mentioned before, because to me, like you're saying, that idea of it just being another one, the thing that would have differentiated it would have been the story stuff. It should have been Sony leaning on that and going, hey, look, we're taking everything you know us for, and we're doing a hero shooter or a live service version of that. Look at this cutscene animation, because the first time you see that shouldn't have been the open beta. And I know that they had bits of it in the reveal, but it was that weird side thing where the guy was using the hot sauce, and it was like trying to do this weird goofy. People were sick of it by the time that teaser intro cutscene ended, as opposed to opening it in game or in engine and being like, this is what it's actually going to look like. And they should have sold it on where the titans of storytelling in video games, and we're going to apply that, and what's that going to look like, and don't you want to show up and see, and we're going to tell the story across weeks and months and stuff. And they just didn't do any of that. Like, it's just the elements of the game are there. It is a story told over multiple weeks, and they've committed to a season plan. But I just really can't believe it. Like, it's just such a misfire on such a big level that I find it fascinating. And it sucks because, like the human reality of working on a project for 8 years, and everyone I'm sure would have had an absolute blast putting it together, but the reality of hitting the end point and you don't get your flowers, you don't get the payoff, that sucks. And like you said, the talent is there. All of my lambasting or whatever is more towards the way the project's been handled and advertised and failed from the top down.
Yeah, totally.
Because the gameplay is solid,
Yeah, that's it. I think that's the most disappointing, because, something like Suicide comes out, and you don't want, obviously, even when we reviewed that and talked about that, we said, like, there's so much quality in it from a developer's perspective. We don't want to see Rocksteady and get a kicking like that, but at least that was a game where, like, you can see why there was a backlash to it in terms of how it played, in terms of its failings, in terms of it being kind of like a disaster and not fun to play. Whereas Concord's, I don't know, biggest issue is that it's like just seems like a little bit middling, a bit forgetful, a bit all right, and it's like it's a shame for it to bomb this hard. And I know there's like a lot of bad faith discussion around it as well that has, garnered a lot of negativity towards the game, which I resent as well. But
bad faith discussion on literally everything.
Oh, that's it. Like, this year there has,
hold up a flower and someone be like, well, it's not the flower I like. So,
100%, and that certainly doesn't help. But I think it's just so many different factors on top of it that's kind of made it released to this reception, and it makes me wonder what Sony's going to do going forward, because I don't want to see layoffs at the studio. I want to see the studio get another chance. It's just, I want to know what they were expecting out of this, what the team, if it's the vision the team wanted, because you mentioned the idea of telling a story through a multiplayer game. And to me, it's not that you can't do that. And I always champion games taking risks and trying to be the first to make something work. But at the same time, it's never worked before. You know what I mean? It's never worked.
That's the thing.
It didn't work for Titanfall, which was an absolutely unreal game from the creators of Call of Duty. And one of the biggest knocks against it was that multiplayer games and just the format of them, whether it's hero shooter, whether it's military shooter, just you don't go there for a story, and it's hard to tell a story that is really satisfying and you feel like you have some control over in that multiplayer space. It's nice to have, but for me, it should never be like the driving force or the thing, unless you're doing something completely revolutionary with that idea.
Well, that's what they needed to do, right? I think to me the only time it's worked is Bungie with Destiny 2, and even then it took them most of that game's life cycle to get there. But everyone that has played Final Shape says that's a really good culmination of everything that there's played off across the last few years. And I know that all the mission types are different, like it's not like a straight up arena style hero shooter. But yeah, that idea of them attempting this is that's the dice that you roll. Like that's the thing that you try. You're Sony for why even do this if you're not going to do this properly? But yeah, I mean, something like The Last of Us Factions, the leaked stuff for that seemed to mention a cast of characters and trying to live in a mansion, and they would go out and do different missions, and it seemed like that would have a through line story as well. I have we'll move on from this, but I have a weird conspiracy theory where, like, because of everything that we've now found out about Bungie and how completely sideways they've gone and how much they didn't know what they were doing for so long, I wonder whether they killed The Last of Us because it would have been better than anything they could have put out, and they let Concord live because they knew it would die, and then they knew the Destiny and they would be seen as better off. The individuals making those decisions, not obviously the entity overall. But none of this makes any sense in regards to the Sony live service plans, the execution of it, and where we are right now, where less than 100 people care about the one game they have put out. It is insanity.